He placed his weakest troops, the Gauls and Iberians, in the center of his line. But he did not place them flat. He pushed them forward in a curved, convex crescent that bulged toward the Romans. On the flanks of this infantry center, he positioned his best soldiers, the veteran Libyan heavy infantry, armed with weapons and armor stripped from Roman dead at Trebia and Trasimene. These veterans stood in deep columns, set back from the center, almost invisible from the Roman perspective. On the left flank by the river, he placed his heavy Iberian and Gallic cavalry. On the right, the Numidian light horsemen. The Romans advanced. The massive infantry block drove straight into the Gallic and Iberian center, exactly as Hannibal wanted. The crescent began to flatten, then it began to bend inward. The Gauls and Iberians gave ground step by step, absorbing enormous punishment, dying by the hundreds, but they did not break. They fought a controlled retreat, bowing the line from convex to flat to concave, drawing the Roman mass deeper and deeper into a shrinking pocket. The Romans believed they were winning. Officers screamed for their men to push harder. The Carthaginian center was collapsing. Victory was minutes away. It was not. On both flanks, the cavalry battle had already been decided. Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry on the left shattered the Roman horsemen against the river, then wheeled completely across the rear of the battlefield and struck the Allied cavalry on the opposite flank from behind. Within the first hour, every Roman cavalryman was dead, captured, or fleeing. Then the trap closed. The Libyan veterans on both wings pivoted inward, wheeling 90 degrees and driving into the exposed flanks of the Roman infantry mass. The cavalry charged the Roman rear. In a matter of minutes, 86,000 men were surrounded on all four sides. Think about what Hannibal actually did here. He took his weakest troops and used them as bait. He deliberately allowed the Romans to push into his center because the deeper they advanced, the more compressed and disorganized they became. By the time the Libyan infantry hit their flanks, the Romans were so tightly packed that soldiers in the middle could not raise their arms to fight. They could not turn. They could not retreat. They could not even fall down without being trampled. The killing lasted hours. Ancient sources describe Carthaginian soldiers growing physically exhausted from the act of slaughter. Men rotated in and out of the killing perimeter because their sword arms gave out. The Roman historian Livy records men baring their throats to their enemies and others burying their own faces in the earth to suffocate rather than wait for the sword. Some soldiers dug holes in the ground and pressed their mouths into the dirt until they could no longer breathe. Polybius estimated 70,000 Roman dead. Livy recorded roughly 48,000. Modern historians suggest the true number was somewhere around 30,000 to 50,000, though the exact figure will never be known. What is certain is the scale of the leadership losses. Among the dead were the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, who refused to flee and died among his men, both consuls from the previous year. 29 of 48 military tribunes, and approximately 80 sitting senators, roughly a quarter of the entire Roman Senate, wiped out in a single afternoon. Carthaginian losses were approximately 5,700, almost all of them Gauls and Iberians from the center. The men Hannibal had asked to absorb the blow and hold long enough for the trap to close. The other consul, Varro, escaped with perhaps 70 horsemen. Among the survivors who fled to the town of Canusium was a young officer named Publius Cornelius Scipio. Remember that name. After the battle, Hannibal's cavalry commander reportedly urged an immediate march on Rome. When Hannibal refused, the commander is said to have replied that Hannibal knew how to win a victory but did not know how to use one. The quote is almost certainly a Roman literary invention. Polybius, the more reliable source, never mentions it. But the question it raises has haunted military historians for over 2,000 years. Hannibal did not march on Rome because he could not take it. He had no siege equipment. Rome's walls were massive. His army was bloodied and exhausted. And Rome, even after the worst military disaster in its history, still had the manpower to raise new armies. Hannibal's strategy was never to storm Rome. It was to shatter Rome's network of Italian allies by proving that Rome could not protect them. After Cannae, much of southern Italy did defect. Capua, the second city of Italy, opened its gates. Syracuse switched sides. Philip V of Macedon signed an alliance, but the Latin heartland held, and Rome refused to break. The Senate banned the word peace. They refused to ransom the prisoners. They lowered the draft age, enlisted criminals and debtors, armed 8,000 slaves, and built new legions from nothing. They reverted to the Fabian strategy that had once been mocked as cowardice. They avoided pitched battle, recaptured defecting cities one by one, and slowly strangled Hannibal's position across 15 years of grinding attrition. In 207 BC, Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal crossed the Alps with reinforcements, was intercepted at the Metaurus River, and was killed. The Romans threw his severed head into Hannibal's camp. By the time the young Scipio, the survivor of Cannae, invaded Africa in 204 BC and forced Carthage to recall its greatest general, Hannibal had been confined to the toe of Italy with a shrinking army and no hope of reinforcement. At Zama in 202 BC, Scipio defeated Hannibal using a version of his own tactics: superior cavalry on the flanks, a trap that turned the enemy's strength against them. Cannae in reverse. Hannibal escaped, returned to Carthage, and advised the Senate to accept peace. The war was over. Every military academy in the Western world still teaches the Battle of Cannae. Count Alfred von Schlieffen, chief of the German General Staff, built his entire strategic doctrine around what he called the Cannae concept. The idea that the perfect battle is one of total envelopment and annihilation. His Schlieffen plan for the invasion of France in 1914 was a direct attempt to replicate Cannae on a continental scale. After the 1991 Gulf War, General Norman Schwarzkopf said he had learned many things from the Battle of Cannae, which he applied to Desert Storm. Dwight Eisenhower wrote that every ground commander seeks the battle of annihilation and tries to duplicate the classic example of Cannae. 22 centuries after a Carthaginian general drew a curve in the dirt and dared the Romans to walk into it, his lesson remains the foundation of Western military thought. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to your enemy is let them think they have you exactly where they want you. Hannibal never got to enjoy any of it. After Zama, he served Carthage as its chief magistrate, reformed its finances, rooted out corruption among the merchant oligarchy, and made Carthage solvent enough to offer early repayment of its war indemnity. His reward was betrayal by his own countrymen. His political enemies, backed by Rome, accused him of conspiring with foreign kings and forced him into exile around 195 BC. He was approximately 52 years old. He would never return. He spent the rest of his life running. He fled to the Seleucid court of Antiochus III, offering his services as a military advisor. When Antiochus was defeated by Rome, Hannibal fled again. He moved through Crete, possibly Armenia, and finally took refuge with King Prusias of Bithynia in what is now northwestern Turkey. He was an old man now, tired, alone, still dangerous enough that Rome refused to forget he existed. Rome sent an envoy named Titus Quinctius Flamininus to pressure Prusias to surrender his guest. Prusias, unwilling to defy Rome, agreed. Soldiers surrounded the house. Every exit was blocked. Hannibal had carried poison with him for years, waiting for this moment. He drank it. According to the Roman historian Livy, his last words were these: "Let us relieve the Roman people of their long anxiety, since they find it tedious to wait for the death of an old man." He was approximately 64 years old. He had not seen Carthage since fleeing into exile decades earlier. The boy who swore an oath of hatred at a temple altar had kept that oath for over 50 years. He never became a friend of Rome. He never stopped fighting. And Rome never stopped hunting him, even when the old general was unarmed, alone, and living in a borrowed house in a country that was not his own. 37 years after Hannibal's death, Rome returned to Carthage one final time. In 146 BC, Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the man who had defeated Hannibal at Zama, besieged the city, burned it to the ground, and sold its 50,000 surviving inhabitants into slavery. The site was forbidden rebuilding. Carthage ceased to exist. The man who had sworn to destroy Rome had, in a way, destroyed Carthage instead. Not by failing, by succeeding so completely that Rome could never forgive the threat. Cannae haunted Rome for generations, and the only way Rome knew how to answer that fear was to make sure that no Carthaginian would ever stand on an altar and swear an oath again. If you wrote this as fiction, nobody would believe it. Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments, do you think Hannibal should have marched on Rome after Cannae, or was he right to wait?